Welcome back. This is English 201B. I'm Professor Patel, and this is my first lecture on Hamlet. This lecture will be on Act 1, scenes 1 through 5, and the lecture's title is Some Strange Eruption. Hamlet is a play that has so much said about it. It is probably the most staged play in the history of theater, and that is around the world, not just in the West, in, say, Europe and the United States and English speaking countries. Hamlet has been translated into a myriad of languages, and it's been performed on the decks of ships, out in the middle of the desert, in all sorts of strange places. Our concern with Hamlet is to track the spread of corruption throughout the play. Corruption is like a plague. It can spread from person to person. And what I'd like you to do as you read Hamlet is pay attention to the connections that occur throughout the play. I'm talking about the connections from character to character, from group to group, even connections by letter. And we're going to get a few of those in this play as well. I'm going to take us through it scene by scene and give a little bit of summary and a little bit of analysis as well. So let's start with scene 1. Very interesting that scene 1 and the very first lines of Hamlet are, "Who's there?" These lines are spoken by Bernardo, who is one of the soldiers who is guarding the castle at Elsinore, which is where the court of Denmark is. And even though it's 2 words, it's the beginning of the greatest play ever written. And we have to I'd like to give it just a little bit of attention. It's an interrogative, right? It's a question, and it's almost like it's saying to us, the audience, who's there, who's out there, right? And also, we're going to find that in Hamlet, the question of identity is central. Are we really who we say we are, or are we just a collection of roles that we play throughout our lives, right? One of the questions of Western philosophy is really, who are you under all those roles? When you take all the masks and the costumes and the roles that you play in various parts of your life, what's left behind them all? And we are going to see Hamlet, the character, examine his identity as corruption spreads throughout Denmark. In scene 1, we get the initial knowledge of and the initial contact with a ghost. And this just isn't any ghost. This is the ghost of the former King Hamlet, in other words, our Prince Hamlet's father. And a couple of guards, Bernardo and Marcellus, have seen this ghost 2 times now at night, right around midnight. And they have decided to call Horatio, who's a college student. We will find that Horatio is Hamlet's best friend. They go to university at Wittenberg together, which was a common university for Danes to go to. Hamlet and Horatio are both Danes, meaning they're from Denmark, right? And they have been away at college. And Hamlet was called back for his father's funeral. He got the extra surprise of a hasty marriage between his mother and his uncle Claudius. His mother's name is Gertrude. We are going to see a lot of her in this play, a lot of interactions with her, and Claudius is one of our main characters. In your text, Claudius is usually listed as king for dialogue. Okay, and King Hamlet, the dead King Hamlet, is just listed as ghost. So you want to be aware of that. I want to just mention a couple of things about the guards and their interactions. There's an interaction between the guards after who's there. They say liegemen to the Dane, friends to this ground, and these are. It's almost like everything in this play has some significance. When they say friends to this ground, they mean the land itself. And they're liegemen to the Dane, and they're talking about the king, and in this case, King Claudius, because King Hamlet is dead. And I want to just touch on this connection in classical literature and in feudal societies, that the king is connected to the land. And so the king's fate is connected. The land's fate, rather, I should say, is connected to the land. This is important. We can think back to plays like Oedipus the King. When there's a plague on the land and people are sick, babies are being born stillborn, that means that there is something wrong with the king. Okay, we can think of Le Morte d'Arthur by Thomas Malory. That's the King Arthur cycle, the Arthurian cycle, as it's called sometimes. And when King Arthur or the Fisher King is sick, the land suffers as well. So the fact that the land will probably suffer, that there is corruption spreading out throughout the land, gives us early indication that there's something wrong with the current king of Denmark, and that would be Claudius. We do get to see the ghost briefly. The guards have also brought. I mentioned Horatio, and the reason they bring Horatio, and here this is very interesting. Remember, this is a Renaissance play. It's often characterized as a revenge play, and there's a lot of supernatural in the play. There's a lot of religion, right? We get a ghost. We get portents and omens. We get musings about the afterlife. But also, we are coming up against the Renaissance, where there's a birth of science, of art, of philosophy, all of these things. And so Horatio is a university student. They say that he is a scholar. Thou art a scholar, Horatio. Speak to it, right? So they bring Horatio because he's an empiricist. In other words, he studies. He has somewhat of a scientific background and current knowledge. So they want him to, and he has shown skepticism that there could possibly be a ghost wandering the battlements of Elsinore and scaring these guards. So here we have the Western tradition of empiricism, of the mind, going all the way back to Aristotle, coming right up against this ancient traditions and also religious traditions. We get a lot of Catholicism in this play, of beliefs about the afterlife, ideas about ghosts coming back from the grave, questions about those ghosts. Are they real, or are they sent by Satan to lead us astray? These are two very strong, very old traditions coming together in this play: empiricism and the supernatural, religious type beliefs. Well, this encounter that we have with the ghost is actually the third time the ghost appears. We don't get to see the first two times. Horatio tries to talk to the ghost. It will not talk to him. He implores it. He's very surprised that it actually appears. He's shocked because remember, he's an empirical skeptic from the university, and here he has an encounter with what appears to be a real ghost, and this sort of leaves him shaken, and it won't talk. There's a little interlude, and then another one of the play's major two issues is mentioned. The first one being the ghost appearing, right? And the ghost, when a ghost appears, you know problems are coming. The other one is Marcellus asks Horatio and Bernardo. Marcellus is one of the guards. Why the people of Denmark and the people around Elsinore are working day and night. He says a sweaty haste that makes the night joint labor with the day and does not separate Sunday from the week. That's fancy talk for 24/7, right? They are building ships. They're putting cannons together. They're preparing all sorts of weapons and armaments. And Marcellus wants to know what's going on. Here we get a little exposition from Horatio. Horatio tells about Fortinbras of Norway, and we get a little bit of history about King Hamlet. And what happened was, sometime in the past, we will find out later, King Hamlet fought against the King of Norway, whose name was Fortinbras. Very similar. Hamlet has a son named Hamlet, who is our hero. And old King Fortinbras now there is now a son who has grown up, and he is Prince Fortinbras. And when King Hamlet and King Fortinbras fought, Hamlet killed Fortinbras. I'm talking about the two kings, and uh, got a bunch of their land for Denmark. So, in other words, in that victory, it wasn't just that King Hamlet killed King Fortinbras, also got a lot of Norwegian land. Now, young Fortinbras it looks like he's getting ready to try something like invade Denmark and come in and get those lands back. We get some really interesting talk from Horatio. Remember, he is educated, so he makes comparisons to Rome, and he says, in the high and palmy state of Rome, before the mightiest Julius fell, he's talking about Caesar. The sheeted dead did gibber, the grave stood tenantless, and the sheeted dead did walk and gibber in the Roman streets. That's pretty intense, right? And he's saying that, before bad things happen, weird things happen, right? So in our case, we got ghosts wandering around the battlements. He says, before Julius Caesar got killed, there were actually sort of like these zombies. The graves emptied out. They were tenantless, meaning they had tenants no more, like when you're a tenant and you're renting a house. So the tenants are now in the streets, and they're dead people. And he says the sheeted dead did walk and gibber in the Roman streets. Very scary image. At this, we get the appearance of the ghost again, and Horatio tries to talk to it, but the cock crows and the ghost disappears. And then we get a little talk from Marcellus about how uh, whenever the cock crows, witch, no witchcraft works, no spirit can walk, no planet strikes, right? Because uh, that is the time of our Savior's birth. And he does mention our Savior, and he says during the time of our Savior's birth. In other words, I guess around December or Christmas, the bird of dawning croweth all night long. Now, if any of you have ever raised roosters, I've raised roosters, and they were called cocks in the ancient world, and even in American literature, say Melville or Hawthorne, they're always referred to as cocks. And I remember dark December nights with our roosters crowing all night long. So this thing about roosters crowing when the sun comes up, don't buy it. Well, out of this, we get two takeaways, really, right? We get the appearance of the ghost, which bodes some portention, right? As Horatio says, this bodes some strange eruption for our state. Okay, and that's the title of this lecture, Some Strange Eruption, meaning something's going to blow up, right? It is also sort of a reference to sort of like when people get the plague and they get pustules, right? It could be seen as a reference to this strange eruptions from your skin. Remember, the land is connected to the king, and if the king is corrupt, the land will become corrupt. If the soul is corrupt, the body will be corrupt. This was a belief going all the way back to St. Paul in his epistles, right? That the body and the soul are different, right? But they do affect each other. And the body is what is most vulnerable to corruption. Okay? That is scene one, a lot of exposition. At the end of scene one, the guards tell Horatio, I know we got to tell Horatio says we got to tell Hamlet this. And one of the guards says, I know where to find him. Scene two opens in a court scene, and we get more exposition. In other words, situations and characters revealed. We get mostly to meet and know Claudius, who is King Hamlet's brother. King Hamlet is dead. And he is now king. And not only is he now king, he has married the former queen and wife of King Hamlet, and her name is Gertrude. This would be not completely unusual, but it sounds like they did it fairly hasty. We'll get some estimates on how long it's been since King Hamlet has been dead as the play unrolls, but or rolls along, I guess I should say. But we know that there's much commentary on this was a quick marriage. And there could be reasons for that, state reasons, political reasons. If it were just a queen, like if Gertrude was left alone at the time, other countries like Norway or Poland might think, Denmark is weak. The king is dead. King Hamlet was a soldier. He was a warrior. The ghost appears dressed in complete steel, cap a pie, meaning head to toe, right? And uh, so, with the warrior king gone, we have a queen on the throne who may be perceived as weak. And this it seems to be the reason Claudius gives for the hasty marriage to keep the state strong, right? Okay, so Claudius is conducting business. The wedding has been very recent between Gertrude and Claudius, and now he's conducting business. Right? He mentions Fortinbras again. His agents have found out that Fortinbras is indeed amassing troops and that he is piling resources, and it sounds like he is right on the border of Denmark. So it sounds like a possible invasion. And we know that Fortinbras, the prince, is angry about two things. His father was killed when he was just a little kid, probably 1 year old. And also, his country lost a lot of land when his father was killed, and he wants that land back. So Claudius is going to send a letter to Old Norway, who, very much like in Denmark, is King Fortinbras's brother, and he is now the king. So, and if you remember your classics like Antigone, Oedipus the King, oftentimes, or remember when Oedipus dies, Creon, Gertrude's brother, becomes king. So, not uncommon for uncles and siblings to take over as the regent when uh, the original dies. The next business is Laertes, who is the son of a courtier, Polonius. He also has returned from university. He's going to college in France, and now that the funeral and the wedding are over, he wants to return, and he does get granted that leave by Claudius. Lastly, after those two pieces of business, is sending messengers with a letter to Norway, and also allowing Laertes to leave to go back to school. Lastly, he turns to Hamlet. This is our first scene where we get to see Hamlet, where we get to encounter Hamlet, and Hamlet is all in black. We get the feeling it's probably been a couple of months since his father has died, and they don't know how he died at this point. And he is mourning. He's wearing all black. It's very sad. If you look at his monologues and dialogue, is very depressed, right? He wears an inky cloak, as he says, and the trappings of woe. So he is really still mourning his father. He gets a talk from Claudius to, you know, get over the mourning. And Claudius used various rhetorical schemes. One of his schemes is, everybody loses a father, Hamlet. Your father lost a father, his father lost a father, his father lost a father, and this is what we call arguing ad infinitum, right? And it's sort of like, this happens all the time, so it's just natural, it's normal. Move on, buddy, right? He even accuses it of being unmanly to mourn so long. He says it lacks reason and intelligence. He really gives it to Hamlet here. And Hamlet is really not buying any of it. And then Hamlet's mother, the queen, Gertrude, implores him to be happy. And important to us, Claudius and Gertrude want Hamlet to stay at Elsinore and not return to his university at Wittenberg. Okay, so So imagine that if you had to go home for some family emergency, and you get there and take care of whatever business there is to take care of, pay respects, do whatever there's to do, and then um, your relatives say, I really think that you should stay here and not go back to college. It'd be better. You'll be closer to us. Everything will be great. That would be really tough on a young college student. Okay, so Hamlet agrees to stay, uh, seemingly much against his inclinations and desires, and he ends up he's going to remain at the court in Elsinore. Uh, After this, we get one of Hamlet's most famous soliloquies, and Hamlet. We want to watch Hamlet's evolving ideas and views about death and the afterlife, and in this case, suicide. So here he goes through, oh, that this too solid flesh would melt, fall away and dissolve into a dew, right? I mean, he's saying, I wish I would just disintegrate. I wish I would just die. And then he goes on to say, or that the everlasting has not set his canon against self-slaughter. He's talking about God here. God is the everlasting, right? What about canon? He uses a term. He says, "Set God has set his canon against self-slaughter." Now we're not talking about an artillery piece here, like a howitzer or something like that. This is canon, canon, and a canon is usually a collection of books, typically laws, right? So Hamlet's saying, I wish I could kill myself, but it's against the law of God. Interestingly enough, most societies, most religions, suicide is seen as bad, sinful, those sorts of things. So even all the way back to Socrates. Socrates says, it's really kind of bad to kill yourself because you belong to the gods, and it's like destroying the gods' property. Kind of reminds me of when I was in the Marine Corps, and they told us don't damage your bodies because you're government property now. That's the same idea. Okay, so let's see. Also, Hamlet once again reflects on the land, and this is important with our theme of corruption, spreading corruption. He says to him, "The world is an unweeded garden gone to seed, and it's gross and rank in nature." Right? This is wasteland imagery, right? And when the kingdom becomes a wasteland in classical literature, it usually means something's wrong with the region, whether it's a king or a queen, and typically it's a king. So we want to keep that in mind. Hamlet is surprised by Horatio and the two guards, Bernardo and Marcellus. He's very happy to see Horatio. Horatio is remember, his buddy from college. Maybe they're roommates or something. Who knows? They're very good friends. And Hamlet is happy to see him. He's probably been kind of lonely and isolated here back at home. I imagine if you were home from college at some really hard thing like a funeral or one of your parents getting remarried, and you were feeling kind of down, and one of your best buds from college shows up. That's exactly what this scene is. And I think that Brana in our version does a great job at showing that scene. At first, Hamlet's just sort of, "Hey, how's it going, man?" And then he turns around and sees it's Horatio, and it's like old buddies meeting. Okay, uh, so they tell Hamlet about the ghost, and one of them says, "Foul deeds will arise," and that is some foreshadowing there for us. So um, we've got some strange eruption for the state, right? And we've also now got foul deeds will arise. I mean, this thing's just setting us up. We're not going to be sitting around here petting puppies, right? In the next in the next 2 hours or 3 hours or whatever it is. The things are going to go bad here, and it seems like they know it. As we go into scene three, I'm just going to touch on this very, very shortly. And there's one part I want you to take a closer look at, and that is, or a couple parts, I guess we could say. Here we get Ophelia, who is Laertes' sister. Remember, Laertes is the son of the courtier Polonius. And Laertes is getting ready to go back to college, but he wants to talk to his sister, give her some brotherly advice. And what does he tell her? I've heard you and Hamlet have something going on, that you guys are becoming an item. And I think that it's a bad idea. He's probably just playing you because he's going to be the king, and with his position, he is bound. He has too much responsibility. You don't want Once he becomes king, he's going to dump you, or once he gets more into his. So Laertes' argument to Ophelia is, Hamlet's just playing you, and that his position limits his freedom. Okay, this is important because his dad is going to say the exact opposite thing. Something else too, when Laertes is talking to Ophelia, look for these lines in there. This is interesting to us because of our theme of corruption, and because of the idea of plague spreading. And that is, he says, and in the morn and liquid dew of youth, contagious blastments are most imminent. Now, what are contagious blastments? Literally, there's something like open sores, right? They're blisters, or and contagious. We all know what that means, right? So this is straight up plague imagery here. And he says it's most common in the young, right? And um, the young are often most vulnerable to uh, epidemics and pandemics, along with the old. So that's a little spot there. At the end of the scene, we get the very famous speech spoken at many graduation ceremonies at colleges, and it's Polonius's advice to his son Laertes before he leaves to college. We get uh, we get famous lines like, "The apparel oft proclaims the man," and if people say the clothes make the man. I guess we should say now the clothes make the person, right? And he also says a very famous line: "Neither a borrower nor a lender be, for loan oft loses both itself and friend." Right? So he gives them all these sorts of advice. You got good friends, keep them close. Don't be too comfy with strangers. Um, keep yourself modest. Have fun. All these things. He kind of goes through his very good fatherly advice. We're going to find out that there are some strings attached to this fatherly advice, and we'll see that in the next act. So after this, Polonius talks to Ophelia, and he too says, "I've heard you and Hamlet are hanging out. I want it to end." She says, "Oh, he's written me poetry, and he's told me he loves me." And Polonius says, "Springes to catch woodcocks." Now, springes, think of this: springs. So if you imagine a trap, springes to woodcocks. Woodcocks are kind of dumb birds, right? And so he's saying, all of Hamlet's little poems and his lovey-dovey stuff, they're just traps to catch you in. You're just like a little innocent dumb bird, and he's a big old spring trap with a spring on it, and it's going to get you. And then he forbids her to have anything to do with Hamlet, and to return any love letters or any of those sorts of things. And this is going to have significant implications for later on in the play. And Polonius's main argument is, as I said, the opposite of Laertes. What did Laertes say? He's got too much responsibility. It's like he's chained down. He's not going to be able to. He's just using you right now. Once he gets in there, he's going to get some queen from another country or something, because he has to. Polonius says the exact opposite thing. He says, Lord Hamlet is going to be a king, and he's a prince. He can walk on a longer tether. He says larger tether, something like that. Meaning, he's got a long leash. He can do whatever he wants. So kind of interesting how they go opposite directions. One thing that we can take away from those two discussions, is that both Laertes and Polonius consider Hamlet dangerous. They consider having, for their daughter and sister, Ophelia, to be in danger of something bad happening to her through her connection with Hamlet. So you might want to consider that in our investigation. Uh, at and now we'll go into scene four. Okay, and in scene four we get Hamlet, Marcellus, and Horatio. They've already given Hamlet the news that they found this ghost, and Hamlet has told them that he would join them on the battlements and see if the ghost appears at midnight because he wants to talk to it. So we get them in a meeting. We get Marcellus, Horatio. Remember, Marcellus is one of those soldiers who was guarding the castle. He must have the night watch. He is the only soldier here in this scene. We get Horatio, who is, remember, Hamlet's college buddy, and we get Hamlet. And Hamlet does come armed. He's wearing a sword. Okay, and we get a very interesting. While they're talking on the battlements, they can hear partying going down in the castle. And when Horatio asks Hamlet, what's going on down there, he says, "The king takes his rouse." Right? I've always thought that's kind of a cool term for partying. Huh? What's he doing? He's taking his rouse, right? And that's where the term carouse is related to that. Like he's out carousing, right? So taking your rouse or carousing. And so what's actually going on, sounds kind of funny for a king, is the king is sort of doing shots. And every time he takes a shot, a cannon fires, right? And that'd be a party, huh? So, and they keep hearing the cannon. So Claudius is tying one on down there. He's going on the tear, as they say in Ireland, right? So, so they're talking about this, but Hamlet's this is that Renaissance intelligence once again. Hamlet starts a little sort of theory about, do people drink too much or do things like that, a self-destructive behavior? He says it's a mole in their nature. So it's almost like he's saying, this is not learned behavior. This is something biological. And I think that this is a debate we still have today. How much of addiction or self-destructive behaviors are genetic, are in our genes, a mole in nature, or are they learned, or is it environment? So kind of interesting. And what this reveals to us about Hamlet is that he's a thinker. Hamlet is sort of like the bridge. He's part Horatio. He's the university, but he's also very open to the supernatural, to phenomena that is not explained. In fact, he will say a little later, "There's more in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy, Horatio." Right? Meaning, science can't explain everything, according to Hamlet. So the ghost appears again. It draws Hamlet away from against, and Horatio and Marcellus try to restrain Hamlet, but the ghost manages to lure him away. In fact, when they get really tough, Hamlet actually draws his sword on them, says, "I'll make a ghost of anybody who tries to stop me." Right? So he's intent on going away with the ghost alone to try to get some words with it. And as soon as he leaves with the ghost, we get another one of the most famous lines from the play, and that is from Marcellus, this guard that we really never get to see again after these scenes. And he says, "Something is rotten in the state of Denmark." Right? So once again, more corruption imagery. These are all signs, right, that bad things are coming, and it's not just like there's going to be an earthquake or something. This is bad things, like spiritual bad things, ghosts, murders, revenge, all those types of things. So that corruption is growing. And lastly, we get just the king. Just the dead king. We get King Hamlet, and who's dead. He's a ghost, and his son, Prince Hamlet. The ghost gives clues to his whereabouts. He says he has to fast and purging fires during the day. He's confined to fast and purging fires during the day. And the word purge makes us suspicious that perhaps he is in purgatory. And he does make some comments saying that he never got to, he went to his death with with all the sins from his days of nature. In other words, he didn't get to go to confession and he didn't get last rites. So he had all of those sins that he never confessed on his soul. and he did not get the sacrament of last rites. And using the term purged and thinking to Catholic theology, there's a good argument to be made that he's in purgatory. The other idea is perhaps hell. There is a theological problem with this, though, and that is that in Catholic theology and most mainstream Christian theology, uh, there is no commerce between heaven and hell, between purgatory and earth, right? It's they're all one-way streets. When you die, you go somewhere, and you don't come back as a ghost. So the explanation frequently given was that if people see ghosts, like say you see your Aunt Petunia or something like that, the explanation given by Christian theology is that ain't your Aunt Petunia. That's some devil coming back to torment you or lead you astray. So this is going to be a concern of Hamlet's after his encounter with the ghost. Uh, the ghost reveals that he is his father's spirit. Hamlet, I am the father's spirit, right? He also details his own murder. He reveals to Hamlet, or at least he claims, that he was murdered while sleeping in his orchard. I mean, it sounds like he was having tea or something and then just taking a little nap. And somebody poured poison into his ear. And this somebody was his brother, right, who is now the current king of Denmark and rules at Elsinore. Okay, so there is some plague imagery in lines 70 to 72. We're in Act 5 now. And he talks about his body becoming Lazar-like and crusting over with sores and his blood curdling and all those kinds of things. And it really does sound like somebody who had the Black Plague, the bubonic plague, something like that. So we do get that imagery here. Uh, he also, let's see, he also urges his son, Prince Hamlet, to revenge. Okay, and here really the ghost is putting into action pretty much everything that's going to go on in the play, except for that outlier of Fortinbras. But we could argue that the ghost is also responsible for that, because if you remember, in his days of nature, as he would say, he also killed Fortinbras's father. So the ghost is sort of like the primary vector. It's what they might call patient zero or something like that. If this is a plague of corruption that's spreading, all of these things are started by the ghost. There's two strains. There's that Norwegian problem, remember, and then there is the murder of King Hamlet by his brother Claudius. And so I guess we could say Claudius is involved too. But in these tragedies, and remember, a tragedy is not just, oh, something really bad happens, like, I got a flat tire and I was late for class or something like that. That's not a tragedy. It's just, something crappy that happened. Tragedy is terrible things happening to great people. Okay. So, great people, generals, demigods, kings, queens, princesses, princes, that's the kind of people that tragedy happens to. I mentioned generals because, interestingly enough, in the tragedy of Othello, the lead character, Othello, is a general, and the tragedy befalls him. Okay, so, and also, if we remember Friedrich Nietzsche from his treatise, The Birth of Tragedy, to Nietzsche, who's a German philosopher, late 19th century, he says that tragedy involves a glorious waste of potential. And so we're going to have to figure out what that potential that's going to be gloriously wasted in Hamlet is going to be. Well, after Hamlet learns all this from the ghost takes off because the sun is rising, and Horatio and Marcellus finally catch up to Hamlet, and they try to get it out of him, what happened, what the ghost said, and he acts kind of ridiculous, and then he says that this was an honest ghost. He believes it. He seems to believe it, and he tells and he makes a couple of kind of odd jokes Like he says, there's not an errant knave in Denmark, or not a villain in Denmark, except for he's an errant knave, right? Meaning, all the bad people in Denmark are jerks. It's sort of a circular, begging the question type argument. And Horatio says, we don't need a ghost to come from the grave to tell us this. What's going on? And then Hamlet gets a little serious and he says, yes, by St. Patrick, there is something going on here. Now, interestingly enough, he mentions St. Patrick, and in sort of Catholic folklore, St. Patrick is often seen as the guardian to the gateway of purgatory. So, kind of interesting that that is the saint that Hamlet mentions when he's pressed about the ghost, meaning he probably thinks the ghost is in purgatory as well. So, we've got a couple of problems. This is pretty much where it ends. He makes Horatio and Marcellus to swear that they will never tell anybody what they've seen and experienced this night. And also, there is kind of a loose thread here, though, because remember, Bernardo, the other soldier, saw this ghost, and we don't know what happened to him. He's gone, right? He didn't have this shift or this watch. And this is kind of one of those things with vectors spreading plagues, right? Maybe we could see this as Hamlet trying to contain this corruption by swearing Horatio um, and Marcellus to secrecy, but also there's a loose thread out there. Bernardo's already going out there and uh, mixing with people and hanging out, probably at the soldiers' pub or whatever. So I think it's interesting that there's always loose strings. There's somebody else who knows, and we never find out what happens with Bernardo. We never see him again. Okay, so a couple things we want to end with. One is the problem of the ghost's authenticity. This is going to bother Hamlet because he is wondering, is this a real ghost, or is this some kind of, as he says, a goblin damned come to lead my soul astray, right? And so that's going to be a concern. He's got to figure that out somehow. And in the Brana version, later we see him in his library and he pulls down a book on demonology and trying to do some research. Remember that Renaissance thing? That is not in the text, in our Norton text. Okay, but that is Brana's stage direction, and I think it's pretty good. And lastly, and this will go on through the entire play until it's sort of tied up at the end, there's still that issue of Prince Fortinbras and an army out there on the border getting ready to attack. Okay, so keep those things in mind, get characters' names down, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.